Welcome to Positively Vermont. This is Dennis McMahon, and our special guest today is John Sayles, the CEO of the Vermont Foodbank. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I always like to say that in the run-up to Thanksgiving and the holiday season, I like to focus on the Vermont Food Bank and what it's done. And there may be a time now where there's a particular need. But first of all, just tell us about yourself.
Sure. I've been in Vermont for over 25 years. I spent about 10 of those years working for state government, working as a utility regulator and at the Agency of Natural Resources, and then had the privilege to come here to the Vermont Food Bank, where I've been for 16 years. Um, you could say uh, we have grown tremendously, and I'm not sure that's a good thing, but it's gratifying to know that there are so many people in Vermont that want to make sure that our neighbors have enough to eat every day. I live
That-
here in Montpelier with my wife and have a son at UVM right now.
That's great. Could you just describe the nature and scope of the Vermont Food Bank, how it operates and what it
Sure.
does?
Yeah, I talked about us growing. The food bank's been around since about 1986. We're the only food bank in Vermont. It's We are the statewide entity that provides a lot of the food to the local organizations, the food shelves and meal sites, places like I was just talking this morning about the South Burlington food shelf, feeding Champlain Valley, um, senior meal sites, school programs. So the food bank last year distributed about 14.5 million pounds of food out of three distribution centers. We have one in Barrie, one in Rutland, and one in Brattleboro. We have a fleet of trucks and we drive around and deliver food to all these community partners. In fact, there's about 225 food shelves and meal sites that are partners. And then if you include the direct distribution programs that we run, like our Veggie Van Go and our SASH program. SASH is supportive housing for people older Vermonters and people who are disabled. We do direct distributions there. So it's about 300 partners across the state altogether. And we get food uh, from private donations from the grocery industry, grocery stores, and food manufacturers and distributors. We get food donated nationally through our national partner, Feeding America. So we can get truckloads of food from national manufacturers and distributors. And of course, Vermont farmers. We both get donations from our Vermont farms and we purchase food from them also. We run two federal programs, so we get about 25 to 30% of our food pending is federal food. Um, and and then we purchase the balance of that food because we want to make sure we have the right things, and we're not always getting everything that people need donated. So some of our revenue goes towards purchasing food. Now, most of that money comes from individuals, family foundations, and other organizations right here in Vermont. About 70% of our budget comes from donations. We're tax deductible 501(c)(3), and then we do get a, a, some federal funding to run the federal programs, which we can talk about them and the jeopardy there.
Yes.
And then also some support from the state of Vermont, which has been increasing over the last couple of years. And we've been working with the state. They've been a great partner.
That's great. Well, approximately how many people does this serve?
Yeah. So the food bank and through our partners and directly serve about 72,000 Vermonters a month. And that's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. And so, it's not when you think about the people who are going to a food shelf or getting charitable food, it can be folks kind of having a hard month. It can be an older Vermonter who's maybe on a fixed income and has high rent and uses this as a supplement to make ends meet every month. It could be somebody who's going through a life change, a divorce or had an injury and is out of work. Lots of reasons, but it's a lot of Vermonters, and we're just really glad to be there to be able to support our neighbors.
That's great. We'll get into some of the ways that people can help and some of your needs, but I'd like to discuss the current situation.
Yeah,
I know last year we focused on food insecurity and that matter, but now we have a number of issues. The impact of the government shutdown, certain cuts in programs. Uh, I'm glad you outlined these for me the other day, but let's talk about that. Let's talk about the impact of the shutdown, which we're going through right now.
right. You know, I take this all the way back to really, if you think about 2017, the recession we had in 2017, 2018, and the food insecurity rates went way up. And it took 10 years for those rates to come back down to the point they were in 2016. Well, then were hit with COVID. And after COVID, it was the surge of inflation. And then we had flooding in Vermont, serious flooding in 2023 and in 2022 and 2023, or 2023, 2024. It's been flooding every year. So we've had these cascading crises. And now adding to that is a cascading crisis that's man-made, right? We have the government's been shut down now for over a month. And what's happening is that the United States Department of Agriculture, which runs the SNAP program, which some people might remember as food stamps and still gets called that. In Vermont, it's called Three Squares Vermont. So the feds have said that they will not, because of the government shutdown, will not fund the Three Squares Vermont program nationwide going forward. So November 1st, which was Saturday, is the day when those funds are usually loaded onto EBT cards, electronic benefit cards, just like a debit card that people can take to the grocery store or the farmer's market or the country store and purchase certain foods. You can only purchase food items and only certain food items with that card. And so people are waking up on Saturday morning expecting or hoping that there would be money on those cards, and there isn't. And for a lot of people, this is a significant part of their food budget. For a few people, it's all of their food budget. And it can be up to a couple $100 a month, which, for people who have lots of resources and eat out all the time and don't have to worry about um, uh, serious budgeting at the grocery store, that might not seem like a lot, but that can be the entire food budget for a small family. Um, so trying to do this quickly, but the state of Vermont has stepped in to take some action here, which we're incredibly grateful. I want to shout out our friends at Hunger Free Vermont also, who have done a lot of advocacy. Now, the state last week made a decision that it would fund half a month of Three Squares Vermont benefits. So by November 7th, there will be half of a Vermont family's Three Squares benefit on their card. Then the emergency board, which is the group of state government making this decision, is going to meet again on November 13th and assess the situation and decide whether or not to fund the second half of the month of November. Now, the hope is that they'll work things out at the federal level and that the USDA will start the federal payments again, because all the dollars that go into Three Squares Vermont and in every other state are federal dollars. They're usually not state dollars. So in addition to that funding of half a month of benefits, the state also gave $250,000 to the Vermont Foodbank to try and help fill that gap between Saturday and November 7th, which is when they think the benefits will be available.
Mhm.
So we took that money knowing that as the food bank, if we were to get food, we don't have a lot of extra food sitting around in our distribution centers. It's constantly going out. So in order to have extra food, additional food in the community, we push those dollars right out. So there were 56 partners distributed around the state, and we made grants to them of this money. And then those local food shelves are going out and getting food and putting it right on their shelves, so they don't
Mhm.
have to wait for us to deliver it. And we're hoping that that helps. It's not going to fill the whole gap, but we're hoping that that helps a little bit. We're also looking at other ways as the food bank that we can get more food out there more quickly, working with our partners.
Hmm. Yeah, I know some people got hit with that on November 1. There's no money there.
Yeah.
I
I just
mean,
talked to when I walked in the office this morning, a coworker had been talking with someone that she knows who did not get their SNAP benefits on November 1st. And she encouraged this friend to go to the South Burlington Food Shelf, which runs an amazing program there. Um, and she was telling the story of this person was a little bit hesitant, but went and then reported back to her just the relief of having over a week's worth of food now in their house and knowing that they're not going to have to worry about putting food on the table until November 7th. So we really encourage people. It can be a big step to go to your local food shelf. But if it's between that and not being able to purchase the foods that you need and your family needs, I really encourage you. You can go to vtfoodbank.org and there's a find a food shelf and you can see where the food shelf is closest to you and the hours and the telephone number and all the information you need.
great. Well, you mentioned this one big, beautiful bill and other cuts to SNAP and squares Vermont. Tell us what's going on with that.
Yeah, and that's on top of this government shutdown challenge. So prior to the government shutdown, this bill HR 1 passed, was signed by the president, and it has the unprecedented, I would say, the largest ever cuts to the SNAP program, which is the national name for Three Squares Vermont,
Hmm.
and very importantly to Medicaid. So the changes to Three Squares Vermont are already going into effect. In fact, about 1,600 um, refugees and asylees in Vermont uh, were cut off from the Three Squares Vermont program. Now, the state was able to find some other ways to get most of them back onto benefits. So that was a really positive. Our state Department of Children and Families works very, very hard to make sure that people can get access to the resources that they're entitled to. Um, but it's still going to be a struggle for refugees and asylees to stay in the program. In addition, it added time limits for benefits for certain groups of people. And what that means is for these certain groups, you can only get Three Squares Vermont benefits for 3 months out of every 3 years, unless you meet some additional thresholds, really additional paperwork. So these groups are unhoused people, veterans. So the Congress agreed to remove food supports from our veterans who are low income, which is just astonishing to me.
Wow.
Um, Mothers who have children between the ages of 14 and 18, um, and and people ages 55 to 64. And so the way that those groups can continue to get benefits is to provide paperwork that proves to the federal government's satisfaction that they are working at least 20 hours a month. And what we know is that most of the folks who are not um, elderly, disabled, or children who are on SNAP are working already. The
Hmm.
challenge is getting the appropriate paperwork and getting it submitted through the appropriate channels to be able to maintain these benefits. And then it's monthly, you have to update this information. It's a huge paperwork burden on people. And what we've seen in other states when this has happened, is that people just kind of give up and leave the program, or there are mistakes made, or the paperwork doesn't go through and they lose their benefits. And it just creates a huge bureaucratic hassle.
And do you have people either by phone or by other means who can help people with this paperwork?
So we do. At the food bank, we have our Three Squares Vermont team, and uh, you can find them on our website, vtfoodbank.org. Also a great resource for people is a website called vermontfoodhelp.com, and that has
Uh-huh.
all of the information you would need. I would also encourage people who are trying to figure out how to navigate this to call 211, particularly if you don't have computer access. The folks at 211 can help you with resources to navigate this also. So we're working with the state and trying to build up the resources and make sure that everyone at the agencies on aging and our community action agencies all have the right information and the same information to help our neighbors maintain these really important food supports.
Wow. Could you describe the food shelf network around the state and what kind of support goes on or what kind of support is needed for that?
Sure. Like I said, there's about 225 food shelves and meal sites all over the state of Vermont. Every community has one. And they're often about 70% of them are run entirely by volunteers. So these are literally your neighbors who care so deeply that they're spending their time and their resources their money to make sure that food is available. Um, you again there's because they're volunteer driven, oftentimes they're not open uh or not open like 5 days a week.
Hmm.
Some of them are open maybe every other week or sometimes once or twice a week. Just I want to just say thank you first of all to all the folks that run those food shelves and meal sites around the state. Um, and the way the system works is the food bank, as I said, we're statewide, and we have a fleet of 10 trucks, and our partners can order from the food bank's inventory, which includes the donated food I was talking about, and the government food and the purchased food, which the oftentimes our food shelf partners can purchase through the food bank. It's kind of like a cooperative program. So we buy by the truckload, and then we'll deliver to them by the case, and we make sure we have a good variety of foods available. And then about half of the food that we distribute, or actually more than half of it, is fresh or frozen food. So a lot of fresh produce, um, things like frozen fruit and vegetables, and frozen meat that gets donated. So we try and really be conscious of the types of foods that are available, so that when people are going to a food shelf, you're not going to ever have the kind of variety you have at a grocery store. But we want there to be enough variety that people can put together a week's worth of groceries and be able to make full meals. And again, our partner network is supported, maybe half to 70% of the food they get comes from the food bank, but they're also gathering food from the local communities and funds and purchasing their own food, making sure that they're meeting the needs of the neighbors that they know really well who are walking in the door there. Um, and like I said, they're all raising money too. So it's important to look at how you can support your local food shelf partner, meal site partner, as well as the Vermont Food Bank, as well as our advocacy partners like Hunger Free Vermont. I mean, we're all kind of working together, doing different parts of the puzzle to create a Vermont that's food secure for everyone.
That's great. Well, would you tell us about the Vermont roadmap to food security? That sounds like a very interesting project.
Yes, I'd love to talk to you about that. So, the roadmap to food security, in fact, I always have a copy here on my desk because I'm looking
Hmm.
at it constantly. Um, This is a plan that was put together. I don't know if your viewers may have heard of Vermont Farm to Plate, which
Hmm.
was an effort to create a 10-year strategic plan for agriculture, local agriculture in Vermont. And one piece of that plan was food security and food access. And what over the last about 2 years, there was a process that spun off a separate plan, which is the Vermont Food Security in Vermont, a roadmap to 2035. And it's a detailed plan with the steps that we can take to create a food secure Vermont for everyone by 2035.
Mhm.
I'm really excited about it. There's a great coalition of folks, and we're really focusing on kind of what can what is the government's role? Things like Three Squares Vermont, like school meals. There are ways that, like a lot of things, if we're going to do something collectively to support us all, we need the government to be involved. So
Mhm.
there are strategies for government involvement. Then there are a series of strategies for how we're going to support our local food system so that we're doing the best we can to feed ourselves in Vermont. So, how do we have people locally who are growing food that we eat, and that everyone has access to that food? Not just if the food is more expensive, not just those that can necessarily spend more for food, but how does everyone share in the bounty of Vermont? And really, how are farms more resilient, right? The climate's changing, the economics situation is changing pretty rapidly. So, we want to make sure that our farms are resilient and are able to be there not just today, but in 10 years and 100 years, still feeding us. And then the third part is about community. It's just like the food bank statewide and then our local food shelves. So how do we support those community efforts? During the floods, all these mutual aid groups popped up, and they continue on, really supporting in a micro way your local community, your town or your village, um, and really knowing what's happening on the ground there. So how do we create systems that allow that local, super local infrastructure to be supportive, and then kind of layer on the ag piece and then the statewide and national piece?
Mhm.
I think one of the main things about the roadmap is we're recognizing that food security is a policy choice. This is not rocket science. We can
Mhm.
feed everyone in Vermont, and we have a plan now. We've been really successful, actually. We've gotten a number of our priorities passed through the legislature, and are working on some strategies with the farming community. So we've been at this for about a year and a half, and it's very exciting. I think we're making progress, and at the food bank here, we're putting a lot of energy into the roadmap.
That's great. Let me ask you this. What we always like to do on Positively Vermont is how people can get involved. And first of all, tell us what you need, whether it's funds or whether it's legislative support, legislative action, people lobbying their legislators, and most importantly, volunteers. So give us a
Yeah,
little checklist of how people can help the Vermont Food Bank.
you really hit the checklist because our what we say is advocate, volunteer, and give, and those are really the three legs of the stool that we need to make the changes that are going to create a food secure Vermont, and I think really a food secure country. There's no reason in this country. There's plenty of resources. There's no reason for people to be going hungry. So the ways people can do that, let's first talk about volunteering. Um, there are lots of opportunities all around the state. So first, I talked about our local food shelf network, and I would encourage people to support their local efforts as best they can. Again, if you go to our website, vtfoodbank.org, to the find a food shelf, um, you can find all the information of the food shelves in your area, including telephone numbers and hours and people to contact. And then we have at the food bank, we do what I haven't talked about it much, what's called Veggie Van Go. It's
Mhm.
a produce distribution, fresh produce distribution. We do them all over the state. And each one, our trucks show up at a designated location at a certain time, often partnering with the school or a hospital. And and then we have a group of volunteers that come together, and people just drive through in their cars, and volunteers will greet them and ask what they want, and place the food in their car. They don't even have to get out, and then just drive through. So
Mhm.
we need, a dozen or so volunteers at each of these events. And if you go to our website and click on the volunteer tab, you can fill out a form and find out more information on how to volunteer for the food bank. And then advocating, you mentioned advocating. extremely important. You know, the the fact that the governor and the legislature agreed um, to support Three Squares Vermont with in the absence of federal dollars is a huge undertaking, and it does not happen unless those folks are hearing from people in their communities that this is a priority.
Mhm.
Um, so you do not ever underestimate the power of a card, a short letter, an email, or a phone call to your legislator or to the governor's office. Um, I also encourage people to contact our congressional delegation. I will say it's really a pleasure to work with Senator Sanders and Senator Welch and Representative Balint.
Mhm.
Um, they are consistently on the side of the people that we're serving and on making the policy changes that
Mhm.
create food security. But they do still need to hear from you that this is a priority for people in Vermont. And you can just call them and thank them for the great
Mhm.
work they're doing to maintain food security in Vermont. You know, likewise with our legislature. Um, so again, if you go on our website, you can see ways to advocate, and you can sign up for an email blast. So if there's a chance to have your voice shared to move an issue forward, then we'll let you know about that. And then again, with advocacy, I would also um, bring in our friends at Hunger Free Vermont, and you can Google them and find them, and they do tremendous advocacy. It was really Hunger Free Vermont that was successful in having Vermont create free school meals for all children, which has been a game changer. It really has. I mean, just think about every child at school being fed and being able to have a full belly and sit there and concentrate on the work that they're doing and growing and playing and becoming, you know, our next leaders here in Vermont.
That's
And then
great.
finally, yeah, finally, of course, you know, I talked about donations, how the food bank it is funded primarily by the generosity of Vermonters. And we can't do this work without you. It really is the state's food bank. I'm, as the CEO, just a steward of that and making sure that we're using your funds in the ways that are the most efficient ways to meet our goal of a food secure Vermont.
That's great. Well, thanks very much, John, and we're going to have you back in the near future, and hopefully some of the news will be better. But I know we're in the middle of a great crisis, and I just want to thank you and your organization for what you're doing and have done. And I've seen a lot of these food banks in operation, and I know some of the dedicated volunteers. So thank you for all you guys do.
Well, I appreciate the ability to talk to your viewers, and I know we keep in touch. So if there's any big changes, I'd be happy to come back on and talk about that.
Excellent. Thanks very much. This is Dennis McMahon for Positively Vermont. My guest today has been John Sayles, CEO of the Vermont Food Bank. Thank you for watching.